119. Judges, this is team 119. So, if you will tell me when you're ready, I will start the timer.
Hello, we are Team 119, and we are proud to be proposing today's fiscal policy.
As it stands today, many facets of the U.S. economy do not presently represent the needs of a modernized America. So the goal for the next 30 years is to promote a modernized economy that can meet the needs of the people while also promoting long-run growth over sector-level short-term growth. Today, our proposal seeks to address these issues in order to keep America competitive on a global stage while creating a fiscally sustainable government.
As you're all aware, our economy has been slowing down while our debt has been steadily increasing. To address these challenges, we propose a multifaceted approach that focuses on increasing the government's revenues and its economic growth. This will help us reduce our debt burden while simultaneously boosting output and creating jobs. We will demonstrate that our plans both benefit the right and the left side of the aisle and summarize the debt to GDP impacts of all of our policies.
In the status quo, our debt to GDP ratio is dangerously high and growing unsustainably, according to the 2022 financial report of the U.S. government. We aim to address these issues with direct fiscal tools as well as programs boosting overall economic growth. The report also discusses income and geographic distributional effects that need addressing. We emphasize these effects by proposing a financial transactions tax, the elimination of Schedule A itemized deductions, and increasing access to higher education as well as transportation infrastructure. Now, more than ever, it is important to implement fiscal policies that develop substantive revenue and bolster growing parts of the economy. In addition, the current debt ceiling crisis is a crucial issue, as the U.S. will be unable to issue more debt sometime between July and September of this year, according to the CBO. If this occurs and a default follows, the Bureau of Economic Analysis reports that it could increase the unemployment rate by 3 to 4% in the coming years, as demonstrated by the graph on the right.
Quantifying the specifics, by 2053, debt will be nearly twice as large as our GDP. While our economy is projected to grow by 217%, debt is projected to grow by 639%, implying our debt to GDP ratio will increase from 104% to 195%.
Our policies focus on investments that will significantly raise our GDP, while raising taxes to offset the costs of these investments. Investment in research and development efforts, transportation infrastructure, higher education, renewable energy, and will raise our GDP substantially. While the costs of these programs will raise the deficit more than our taxes can offset, the cumulative impact of our proposed policies will reduce our debt to GDP ratio from 195% to approximately 78% by 2053.
In creating a modern economy, it is vital we create an equitable economy. Considering this, we propose the elimination of Schedule A itemized deductions, which have costed the economy $1.4 trillion in 2017 alone by giving tax cuts to high-income quantiles as per CBO reports. Fundamentally, we hope to remove distortions from the tax code. The Penn-Warren budget model estimates $2.1 trillion in revenue being generated over 10 years, with primary impacts being placed in the top 10 percentile, furthering us towards an equitable America. By regaining foregone revenue, the Penn-Warren model proposes financing debt reduction, which would crowd in private capital formation and leads to improvements in output, generating a 2.3% increase in GDP by 2053, thus reducing the debt to GDP ratio to 182%.
Efficient taxation is a symbol of modern America. Thus, we propose a narrow-based 5% value-added tax through the credit invoice method, which applies the tax to the sales price and disposes on the sales invoice. This method lays the effect of the VAT entirely onto the consumers, with no impact on VAT practicing businesses. The VAT will effectively replace the current system of excise taxes. However, the estimated VAT may pose a burden on our lower-income population. To offset this, we expect VAT on goods and services that are necessary for subsistence will produce positive externalities like food, housing, and healthcare. We expect to measure 160 OECD countries currently practicing a VAT and generate over $1.95 trillion in revenue over a 10-year period. Our policy will reduce that GDP ratio to 173% 3% by 2053.
A financial transaction tax would be an effective tool in promoting fiscal stability, while some critics argue that an FTT could lead to decreased liquidity in financial markets and discourage investment. A study from Oxford indicates that these effects are limited at best, and most foreign studies indicate that actually, when you look at places like France and Japan, which are similar to the United States, they have not seen this effect. In terms of benefits, first and foremost, a financial transaction tax of 0.5% on stock trades, 0.1% on bond trades, and 0.005% on other derivative trades would have a significant effect on generating revenue for the US government. Research by the University of Massachusetts at Amherst indicates that the FTT generates $7 trillion in total revenue by the year 2053, bringing down the 2053 debt to GDP ratio to 165%, and that this estimate has been consistent with the experiences of other foreign countries. Furthermore, by discouraging speculative trading, the FTT reduces market volatility, and as we've seen in the past by foreign countries, this has run true.
Next, we will rebuild America's historical innovation prowess through investing in research and development, doubling the research and experimentation tax credit to 40%, while restricting what research truly means to counteract drastic lobbying, and continuing the Inflation Reduction Act expansion of the Small Business Research Payroll Tax Credit and tripling ARPA-E and DARPA's budgets will lead to future breakthroughs. In the past, this has been realized, with computers, the internet, and 70% of all drugs coming from government-financed research. Since these policies incentivize firm research and development, we increase the revenue-generating research and development discoveries without suffering a crowd-out of investment. In fact, the opposite is true, as the consensus is that public funding for higher R&D crowds in private R&D spending, and devoting an additional $60 billion a year to boost productivity would more than pay for itself in federal revenues. The Center for Strategic and International Studies reports that every dollar the government spends on R&D leads to 20 to 30% return on investment.
As the United States enters a changing geopolitical landscape, robust research and development output becomes a national necessity. The U.S. R&D tax subsidy rate is a mere 57% of the median rate of other developed nations. The Information Technology and Innovation Foundation indicates that these policies can increase the U.S. productivity growth rate to 3.4% and therefore substantially boost GDP growth. This policy would reduce our debt to GDP ratio to 97%.
In the latest American Infrastructure Report Card, we scored a C-, primarily due to our crumbling roads, railways, ports, and bridges. Not only is this an impediment for individuals, but it has real harms to American industry, as it raises the cost of transporting materials and goods between different regions of America, thereby weakening our supply chain substantially. Additionally, the region with the lowest labor force participation rate across the country, Appalachia, as you can see in the graphic on the screen, suffers from widespread economic distress between a variety of its counties. According to the Appalachian Regional Commission, a robust system of transportation infrastructure reform is the first and most essential step to supporting industry within this area and thereby bringing about higher rates of labor force participation. To this end, we are proposing a $5 billion annual increase in funding in line with CBO projections. This would expand and rebuild our roads, railways, ports, and bridges, boost the industry, strengthening our supply chain, and facilitating the expansion of industry into and within Appalachia. We believe that this would lead to an $11 billion decrease in debt over the next 10 years, and also raise GDP substantially by 2053, leading to a debt-to-GDP ratio of 87%.
Meanwhile, a modern economy requires a knowledgeable and skillful workforce across all sectors. Currently, the national 6-year tuition rate of a bachelor's degree stands at 62.3%, while the 4-year tuition rate of an associate's degree stays below 40%. We propose to invest at both levels to increase the graduate rate by targeting non-for-profit institutions in the bottom half of graduate rates, which tend to have more disadvantaged students. We have modeled our program on existing successful examples, like the accelerated study in associate program at the City University of New York. which has seen 50% increases in graduate rates through a combination of financial aid, free public transportation, and other spending.
According to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, by spending 50% more on students in targeted institutions, our program will boost degree completion rate by half. While the first 10 years display ambiguous GDP effects due to reductions in the labor force, it eventually translates to a higher level of human capital, thus increasing our GDP by 5.73%. Moreover, by 2050, the increased tax revenues will turn the budget effects positive, although the federal debt will still end up $1.6 trillion higher than the baseline level by 2053. In conclusion, our investments in higher education would bring the debt-to-GDP ratio down to 80% by 2053, with positive impacts and extending to the long run.
We propose introducing a carbon tax as a means of revenue generation and expanded subsidization for renewable energy projects, as well as domestic manufacturing to support these efforts. In terms of the carbon tax, we're proposing a $25 per metric ton increase, increasing by 5% annually. This is projected to bring in $125 billion annually. We plan to invest $10 billion of these dollars in order to catalyze growth in the renewable energy industry. We plan to invest $6 billion into hydroelectric and nuclear energy, with the remaining $4 billion being invested in production tax credits for wind energy and investment tax credits in solar energy, and an expansion of existing efforts to subsidize this industry. Additionally, we plan to provide tax credits for the domestic manufacturing of the physical components needed for renewable energy, especially wind, which is massively underserved right now, and also for the domestic purchase of US manufactured energy components, therefore creating manufacturing jobs.
While the U.S. has begun shifting towards renewable energy, it is still ranked 54th in the energy transition by MIT's Green Future Index. Additionally, according to U.S. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm, the U.S. lacks energy security. Our reliance on oil as an energy source makes us dependent on foreign nations such as Russia and Saudi Arabia. And the recent Ukraine conflict has shown that this is a geopolitical liability for us. By promoting investment in the development, production, and operation of renewable energy technologies and facilities, we are investing in our energy independence as well as our industry. While it is hard to quantify the negative effects of climate change, the main costs that carbon emissions will impose on society within the foreseeable future include decreases in labor productivity as well as the productivity of agricultural land. Additionally, costs to the private sector are projected to increase as a result of the effects of climate change, and healthcare disaster relief costs as a result of increased natural disasters will also become a burden on the taxpayer. And the implementation of our proposed policies are estimated to bring our debt-to-GDP ratio to 78%.
Politically, our plan to achieve democratic goals by increasing education funding and addressing climate change. We also achieve Republican goals by reducing reliance on foreign energy and growing domestic manufacturing. Better roads and rail means a safer ride for truckers and lower transportation costs for businesses. Our plan offers political security benefits by reducing our reliance on foreign energy and by working to return the U.S. to the forefront of innovation through R&D investments. Our plan also enables more low-income students to finish their degrees. One group that benefits from our proposal is the population of Appalachia, the region with the lowest labor force participation in the country. Our proposal advances 2 of the 5 priorities laid out by the Appalachian Regional Commission by subsidizing manufacturing for the sustainable energy industry and funding the maintenance and completion of the Appalachian Development Highway System. This plan, on top of our debt-to-GDP ratio impacts, will lead to benefits for Appalachia and greater labor force participation, and therefore benefits to the wider economy. This balanced approach makes this plan politically feasible, enabling us to bring the debt-to-GDP ratio down to 77.6%, while also investing in the long run for sustainable growth.
The overarching ambition of our plan is to initiate policies that catalyze the long-run growth of the United States, eliminating Schedule A itemized deductions, imposing a 5% narrow-based VAT, and adding a financial transaction tax generate significant revenues. These policies provide the government with steady income that they can use to stimulate public and private sectors that are opportune for growth. We will allocate this revenue to build transportation infrastructure, promote innovation, increase our energy security, and support low-income students. With our proposal, the government will be a meaningful force in updating key services and industries as human capital and lifestyle changes needs change. Through our policies, we take intentional steps to modernize the economy and support America in an ever-changing world. Thank you.
Your time has expired. We will now switch to the Q&A session. Which judge would like to go first?
I can start today. This is a very, you've talked about a lot of, like broad and sweeping changes, and so I wanted, one thing stuck out to me as being like very specific, and that was the focus on Appalachia. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you chose to focus on that region?
Sure. So I think our focus on Appalachia was motivated by two key factors. First of all, it is a part of the country that we've seen through both political elements and also its economic elements struggling the most, arguably, out of the many regions of the country. We were motivated by, actually during the Fed Reserve Challenge, seeing incredibly low labor force participation rates, which both indicates that they are suffering economically and also that they are an opportunity for growth for our economy. We looked at Appalachian Regional Commission reports on what would be effective for them, and that's part of what inspired us, along with the fact that our transportation infrastructure is just generally crumbling, to focus on that policy. And we also were looking for a modern way to bring back manufacturing jobs. We did that through renewable energy because the idea that there's this classic buzzline I've heard, just learn to code, we don't believe that's viable in any way, and I believe that bringing back manufacturing through something that is good for the broader American political system would be a great boon.
And adding on to what my colleague said, in addition to that, when we conducted our initial research by reading the 2022 financial report of the US government, we noticed there was a lot of talk about increasing equity and the specific distributional effects, and we believe in society as a whole, equity can take many meanings, and one of those meanings is regional equity. As my colleague stated, it seems that Appalachia has fallen far behind the other regions of the American economy, and we want to do the best we can by proposing sustainable economic and fiscal policy to alleviate that and ensure that there's more equity regionally within our country.
So let me follow up and ask, so you proposed a bunch of ways to increase revenue, and then you've got some additional programs that you're proposing. I didn't see in your plan any cuts to spending, especially entitlement spending like Social Security or Medicare. So I'm wondering, did you consider any proposals to cut, say, Social Security or Medicare spending, and why did you decide against them?
So we did consider these in our early brainstorming sessions. I think we had a couple key reasons for not pursuing those. First of all, politically they're very touchy subjects as they're considered off budget, but more than that, we believe that cutting out Social Security and Medicare is not necessarily a good idea. People have come to rely on Social Security as a long-term way to sustain themselves in old age, and we believe that Medicare is good for people as it enables them to stay well, and a good, healthy workforce, we believe, is a boon to our economy more than the costs of Medicare are. We believe that cutting back and failing to support people in old age and through times of sickness only leads to a weakened workforce and also is just not politically feasible, as people will see that and think, rightfully so, they're cutting away our health benefits and our retirement funds that we were actually promised as far as we're concerned. For those reasons, we're focusing on expansion and growth through also some taxes that raise revenue, more so than cutting away benefits that are useful for the entire country.
Yeah, I would like to expand on what my colleague has mentioned. If we're looking at kind of where we are in the grand scheme of the U.S. economy, I mean, recently we've seen things like, geopolitical conflicts, but most majorly the pandemic. And so during a period where the government did have to very strongly step in and hand out stimulus checks, expand healthcare and the like, We're still seeing people who have developed dependency on it and who still need to leverage those resources, people who are displaced from their jobs. We're seeing a lot of volatility in the labor market. And so these safety nets are particularly important right now. And the hope is that with the growth that we see from our policies, we'd like to see that that first pulls us out and allows us to recover to a point where then we can productively dial back on some of these safety net programs without compromising the welfare of people.
A lot of what you're proposing requires investment. If your economic growth commit to numbers, let's assume that I was able to give you all those growth policies you want. What do you think would be the biggest challenge in having them succeed to the numbers? What's your biggest risk?
I think one risk is about investment in higher education. There has been strong argument that we already have too many people in higher education, and I would say that we need that kind of labor force. And our proposal also makes strong assumption that it will apply to the bottom 0.5% of institutions and increase the commission rate by 50% to this bottom half of students, which is a big assumption. But still, we still believe that education is an important and crucial investment to our economy. And although our short-term labor demand does not need that many higher education students, increasing our labor capital is always good for the long run, especially as emphasized by the both fiscal impact and GDP impact in our slides. This positive effect will extend and become even stronger in the long term. Basically, we're investing into the future, and that may not have immediate effect, but we believe it's worth it.
Can you talk a little bit, just to follow up on the higher education concept? What does that investment look like that you were considering, and did you also consider whether or not that type of investment might simply inflate the cost of college without providing a broad benefit to society?
That would be a very good concern. However, since our focus is mostly on increasing the completion rate of degrees rather than enrolling more students, the effect should be limited. Also, we're focusing on institutions that with lower completion rate, also focusing on students from disadvantaged background. This can reduce the effect of institutions exploiting this subsidy, especially since we're targeting not-for-profit institutions.
I think expanding upon that, this is not the kind of widespread, we will give anyone a loan effort that created the problems we see today. This is a much more restrained solution, essentially targeting people who are already going to college, are paying tuition rates, and then are not able to finish their associate's or bachelor's degree because they simply do not have the income to do so. Those people are already, first of all, contributing to the raised tuition rates, if that's a concern. However, they are doing so without actually creating the benefit of having the degree that they have started to pay for and gone to college for. We are essentially raising our human capital while already having paid the cost of raised tuition rates and not doing so any further.
And more broadly speaking, we believe that statistically speaking, the return of a college education has been increasing over time. And we believe that that statistic will continue as there's a lot of talk about the labor market right now. And when I'm applying to jobs, I know that everybody wants a skilled laborer. And what college provides you, among other things, is skilled labor. So because we believe that the returns to college education will continue to rise as they have been empirically, we think that our targeted solution, which is restrained as my colleagues have mentioned, will do the best that we can to alleviate this and ensure that those who are currently underprivileged in our society have the same opportunities as those who benefited with a better poker hand when they began playing.
Yeah, I'd also like to add that with improved higher education in a restrained and controlled manner, we're also offsetting another risk that presents itself, which is, there's the general fear of, increased research and development in the spheres of technology replacing certain positions, right? As much as we believe in the multiplier of R&D, we have to be sensible of that conflict, which is why in tandem with increased R&D, we would like to increase this completion and access to education. Because people are then faced with the risk of losing the job that they may have that may be, hereditary in their family. Maybe their family is working in a position that is eventually going to be, either outsourced or moved to obsolescence. So then how do we, get them what the capital that they need to keep up? And so even though this does present its own set of risks, I believe it's offsetting another set of risks that's presented in another facet of our policy, providing the balance that we need for long-term growth.
In general, as a team, we're happy to present a package of policies that the interactional effects and the intersection of all of them create the future that we want to see as we grow older. All of us are between the ages of 19 to 22. And in 2053, we hopefully will still be kicking around. And at that point, we want to see the future that we want to participate in. And that's why we propose a set of policies that interact with each other and create outcomes that aren't deviated from each other. For instance, the higher education allows us to modernize our workforce, and some of those people will be working in the renewable energy sector that we're promoting. And that's why we're also promoting R&D investment.
5 minutes remaining.
Let me ask you a question about the value-added tax.
Okay.
Okay. So you said you're going to impose this on a narrow base that excludes necessities. Now, if you generally talk to economists tend to like broad bases, right? Because if you have a narrow base, you kind of give people more of an opportunity to try to avoid the tax. And goods that are not necessities also have more elastic demand. So you are sort of getting some economic distortions there. So I was wondering, is that something that you have thought about, and what would be your response to that if somebody raised that as a criticism?
So yes, we did consider the distortion effects of a VAT, primarily because yes, a VAT will be regressive and a VAT has to be considered based on how affected. Our primary evidence is based on the fact that it is a policy that's been very strongly enforced across multiple countries, like we use a statistic, 160 OECD countries. Apart from that, it's also the fact that we're using a credit invoice method, which specifically actually does not damage businesses at all. And because of that, to address your question more directly, we won't actually be we will be imposing an additional cost on the consumer, but this revenue will eventually be going back towards policies that strengthen the economy as a whole and create a much broader, equitable economy, which is our goal in modernizing the economy. It's not just R&D, not just making these massive infrastructure and bringing money into the economy. It's ensuring that this money is going towards the right communities.
As a final note on your question, actually, part of the reason why we have a narrow-based VAT rather than a broad-based one is that a broad-based VAT is regressive by nature. If we look at exactly what we're cutting out of our VAT in terms of considerations, we are not taxing food, housing, or healthcare. 3 essential things that all people need, and things that are a disproportionate part of the spending for people with lower income. Our more narrow-based VAT makes us less regressive and therefore less harmful to the people who are struggling most.
So to build off on the impact side of things, sort of 2 key things. One, the narrow-based VAT has been adopted in other countries. So there's heavy research to say, okay, this is going to be the actual quantified effect. And also, in terms of US research, the end numbers that we used were from a study that only considered this narrow-based VAT. So in terms of the quantitative side of things, it should be pretty accurate.
Let me ask you a quick, I know we were very short on time, so let's ask for a quick answer. Like the financial transaction tax, I understand why you have differential rates. You have 0.1 for stocks, you have 0.5 for stocks, 0.1 for bonds. But why did you have 0.005, the lowest rate for derivatives, which presumably is the one thing you might be trying to tame and reduce?
I guess the reason why we have the lowest one for derivatives, A, is because that's what the study had also used. And B, I think it makes a little bit of sense because when we're talking about how volatile a market is, it's also going to be dependent on how volatile just people trading the stocks instead of people trading options on the future value of the stock.
Okay. And I know we're getting
We're about a minute and a half left.
You made a great case for why you have all these proposals together. You're looking at the vision of the future you want with it. You're presenting this to Congress as a package. But of all your proposals, which one do you think is the most likely or the easiest that could pass Congress? And which one would be the hardest?
I think easily the one that we would pass the most easily would be transportation infrastructure. in my mind, that's a clear slam dunk. We, first of all, need it in order to not devolve from our current level of economic activity. And second, I think it's universally useful for a wide range of political.
1 minute remaining.
Arguably, I think our most difficult ask would have to be renewable energy. It's already a more hot button topic, a topic that people have declared political stances on, more so than really education and research and development. We believe that the carbon tax credit for renewable energy is harmful to an industry. We do try to offset that by bringing back manufacturing jobs and by not overly taxing, say, oil in particular, but it would be a contentious sell relatively compared to our other policies especially.
The hope is that it's like a scam, right? When we're taking away jobs in Appalachia by imposing strict requirements for renewable energy, we're hoping that by investing in Appalachia, those same people who are working in coal or some other fossil fuel source will have the jobs necessary for them to make that shift. And as my colleague was talking about on the right,